So originally, obviously, MOAS was set up to save lives at sea in the Mediterranean initially, but now you have this huge operation going on here in Ukraine. Given what the roots of this organization were, like what led you to expand and enter this new territory?
Right. Well, I think at the very beginning, when 2013, when concept of MOAS was coming up, it was about filling a gap, that it was too difficult for countries to organize to start rescuing people who are washing up where we were living. And it was very simple, like, could I do something that could fill this gap? And so that was the start of that idea of MOAS, how we could fix something, small and efficiently, and without so much bureaucracy. So sort of concept of I would say a business philosophy on how an NGO should be run efficiently, effectively, and directly to the point. And so saving lives or picking, out drowning people in the water is you can't get more direct than that, or so we thought until we came to Ukraine. But when we did that, it was very much a test on could we accomplish our goals, and could we also bring this to scale. And I think over the 4 years that we did that, we expanded. We had used our ship overseas, not just in Malta but the Aegean, also in Southeast Asia. So we explored different ideas on how we could most be effective in helping that. And I think that 2017, when the politics became very volatile and toxic, we looked around, we saw 13 other NGOs that had followed our model, and lives were being saved. And for us, that every job must come to an end, and then from every ending is a new beginning. And so from that point, we moved on, and it was like 100,000 Rohingya had fled from Myanmar into Bangladesh. We deployed our ship there. We brought aid. All of our Maltese team who were saving lives at sea came on land, and we built hospitals, and we treated 100,000 people that crossed. And we're still there to this date, providing different training and refugee service. So for us, that taking this approach of being an effective disruptor into the humanitarian sector is really there's macro and micro sort of goals that we can accomplish by doing this. And for us, that not only were we directly impacting lives, but we were creating models for others to come in. And as you see today, that the world's abrupt with allegations of bureaucracy and incorrect funding of humanitarian operations around the world. But for us, we are probably one of the most efficient organizations and the most impactful for our size. And so as the Ukrainian war was about to happen, I think it was about a month before, we deployed a small force to Ukraine to start to study how we could be impactful here. And we understood that if Ukraine was going to be invaded by Russia, that it was probably going to be the most difficult time in their medical care that they could provide to people, because it just will be overwhelmed. So we knew that the system as it currently was not prepared for such a heavy casualty load. And so we weren't thinking just military, we were thinking civilians, we were thinking children, we were thinking whomever was affected by this war, we would try to do our best. And so we studied the situation. As the war began, we saw the need firsthand, and I saw it firsthand, bodies falling out of the back of a truck because there was no one to care for these people. There was no qualified doctors, there was no qualified even paramedic there, and there wasn't any ambulances. So we saw that need immediately, and for us and this organization that we come to, what did we do? We said, we can fix this. We can improve this system, and we can start saving these people's lives. And so that's the sort of, I guess the same tune as we begun, how can we fill this gap, how can we save lives, and how can we be very efficient in our process. And 70,000 soldiers' lives. That's not including civilians' lives. 30,000 civilians' lives that we've helped to date and in this country, and it probably the most difficult work we've ever done, I think, to date, because just the extent of the casualties and the degree of injury is unprecedented. So it's something that is very difficult to deal with on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. So. How big is the organization? How many people do you employ or are taking part? How many ambulances, for example, they have? Right. Give us what's the scale of it?
Well, MOAS has different entities around the world. We have MOAS in Malta, which is our headquarters. This is where our administration is run. We have multiple projects around the world. Ukraine is our biggest project, but we have about 5-6 people in our home office in Malta, and here in Ukraine, over 150 personnel. We have over 51 ambulances that basically from Sumy all the way down to Kherson, we're across the front line. I think over 13, 14 different positions and bases that we're based out of. And so in those positions that we work on is how we respond. And so we will respond to every single point on the front line. When there's an evacuation need, we're called 24/7 like a firehouse. We respond, we pick up the patient, and we deliver to next.
And how does it work exactly? So you pick up from some stabilization point, I guess?
Depends, yeah. So there are like frontline MASH hospitals, these hospitals that are very near the front line. And this is where if a soldier is injured, he's taken from the trenches or wherever the fighting takes place to these facilities. So MOAS responds in two different ways. We will either meet the military on halfway between the stabilization hospital and the route. And so we will pick up the patient directly from the military and deliver it to this hospital. Or we will deliver from the hospital, the first hospital, to the next hospital. And sometimes we deliver from the next hospital to the next hospital. So it can be a major sort of multifaceted approach. And so we evacuate sometimes over 6 hours. Recently, in one area where we located, we're evacuating over 10 hours at a time, so with multiple ambulances and sort of major critical casualties.
What would you say are the risks for your staff, especially the ones who are closer to the front line?
Every day is they put their lives on the line just simply because of their proximity to the front line. When you're out there and when you're within 20 kilometers from the front line, which is where the majority of our bases are located, there's a variety of risks. So while they are proceeding to the points, we are facing FPV drone attacks, artillery, and just a sort of barrage of different things that can be happening there. And so it's from an everyday standpoint, from their traveling and their logistics is danger. We've been very fortunate that we've never lost any of our personnel. We've had injuries. Our bases have been attacked by missiles, and our entire teams were affected by this, and it was very scary for us. Never forget this night where I was called to say that our base was attacked. But everyone was alive, and I've heard everybody talk about it. It was a miracle. So we've been very lucky, and that's not the first time that's happened. We had an incident where we had a missile came right into our location and didn't explode, but would have killed everyone in the room. So some really magical, blessings that luckily we didn't have any casualties, and so we're very proud about that. But the risk is every day, and so I would say that yes, we face increased risk on the front line, but wherever in this country there can be risk, and so there's every night that you go to sleep, you don't know, maybe that tomorrow will be none. So I think that there is a sort of sense of acceptance that you are here, you are in this country who is at war and who is battling for its safety, and you cannot predict what can happen to you next. You can be the most prepared person in the world, but you cannot control your fate here.
Do you think these attacks are deliberate? Because we've seen in other areas with other organizations where medical personnel, volunteers were deliberately targeted.
I don't have information directly if the attacks that we faced were deliberate or not, but if it was, I wouldn't be surprised. Yes, as you know, that medical facilities and medical personnel have been targeted since the very beginning of the war. So that's not that sort of Geneva Conventions and the protections of medical personnel, emergency personnel in war have not been followed, unfortunately, and so. When you are responding to an emergency, yeah, you have no protection. There is no one that's going. There's not a Russian drone operator who is going to see a MOAS ambulance and who's going to say, "Don't hit that because that's MOAS," or there's a Red Cross on there. There's not going to be that. They're going to attack it, and so it is the nature of the warfare at the moment.
What's your casualty survival rate?
100%. We never have lost a patient in our 3 years of work. 3 years today, 70,000 soldiers, not one has been lost. So we're very proud about that, and that's due to the fact that our teams are probably the most qualified people. In terms of personnel, we have a large number of anesthesiologists. Anesthesiologists are great in this line of work because we are transporting ventilated soldiers, for 4 or 5 hours. And so monitoring and keeping this person alive while he is sedated and when he's under ventilation is an art form. And truly, this amazing group of doctors that we have managed to get here are our angels, and they are amazing, and they're able to do this. And I think that I talk about this a lot. It's not just the quality of the personnel that are working here. It's the doer attitude. We're in a war. Nobody is excited to do anything, frankly. Okay, but when you have MOAS medics there, they're waiting. They are, and I always say it like it's kind of wise. Like we are like dogs. We are panting. We are waiting to serve you. And so that attitude and this sort of sense of service is what has been so admirable about MOAS within the ranks of the Ukrainian army. Simply because that they are able to rely on a medical provider that will be there when they ask. And so that I think is very, very key to the survival, is to be there and to be ready to bring that person to safety and to give him a chance.
You mentioned earlier the scale of the injuries. What would you say are the most common ones? And did you see a change over the last 3 years, given that warfare is evolving? It's changed even in the space of years.
Yeah, it definitely has evolved. I can remember being asked this question at the beginning of the war, and they said, what was the majority of the injuries? And we would say artillery and actually bullet wounds and this type of But as the war has went on, it's the drones, and that's obviously the sort of evolution of modern warfare that we're seeing here is the exclusive use of drones to control the battlefield, and this is something that is changed completely how you evacuate people, the safety and security in the zones that you evacuate from, and especially what type of injuries that the personnel are having affected. And so, as if a FPV drone is striking you directly, I mean, it's much more devastating for the body than a bullet wound or a fragment from an artillery shell. It's catastrophic, and I think that we see that more regularly than ever before, and I think it's basically taken over as the main cause of injury is drones now.
Let's talk a bit about the challenges. I assume that the main challenging is securing funding, no?
Yeah, of course. I think that once it's funny because I'm working with always each project comes with new staff, and I always hear the same things over and over, how frustrating it is, because when you're doing something so important from a life-saving perspective, you think how crazy it is that everything is being paid for by private donors. And so when you're doing a project of our size, which is budget's over $1 million a month, and having survived 3 years off private donors is a huge accomplishment. But because of the very exclusive nature of what we're doing and the fact that it is a critical need here in this war, we've been excluded from government budgets that could have provided support to us, unfortunately, because the fact that we were saving military soldiers. And for the majority of organizations that fund humanitarian aid, for them, that helping a soldier in Ukraine was bad because they were soldiers. And so this was sort of this dilemma at the very beginning, where people had come up to me and say, how could you help this soldier? And when I asked them this question, I said, who is the soldier? Who is this man that you don't want to help? Man that, or a woman that was employed before the war. Maybe he had a regular job. Maybe he was a construction worker. Maybe he was an office worker. Maybe he was a baker. Maybe he had his own business. But anyways, now he is there, and he's fighting for his life because another country wants his. And so, for me, that person is the most valuable person, because he's putting his life so that his family and that his friends and his country can be stable. And so to not help that, for me, for that person, is crazy. And so what is humanitarian? To be human. So that's not being human, not to help that person. Just because he wore a uniform, just because that he went to fight for his country's survival, he should be punished. He shouldn't be helped because it's wrong. Says who? So I question. I think there is. You must question. Why that people don't help. What are your excuses? But there shouldn't be any excuses to help someone who's in need, no matter. And so, I think that once we sort of delved into this arena of discussion, we really researched the Geneva Conventions, and it was very clear from the Geneva Conventions that what we were doing was actually fulfilling the Geneva Conventions of evacuating critical casualties from the front line. And so, I think that sort of criticism, that phase sort of passed, and I think that people start to recognize the key element of what we're doing here, which is filling this gap, which currently that the country is unable to replicate and to provide the exact service which is needed. So we are here filling that, and for that, it's going to continue for as long as it's needed, and as long as we can.
About this gap. Why do you think it is, though, that the country, that Ukraine, is unable to fill it? Because, one would assume that it should be the government providing this kind of very, very critical service. Yet, for the third year running, it's you guys, not even a Ukrainian NGO, technically. So what's causing it? Is it just the massive scale of things? Is it lack of resources?
Yeah, it's manpower. It's manpower. It's manpower that can feel and can dedicate itself to individual cases of evacuation. And so you have to consider that the Ukrainian military has an expansive medical force, and yes, that the majority of their trained personnel are at those stabilization points. And so you can imagine the flow of patients into these stabilization points. Now, are they going to take those doctors from those stabilization points and put them in an ambulance to transport them 4 hours away? Well, what happens as more casualties are coming in? Who's there to treat them as they arrive? So this gap was clear that they could not afford to recruit such personnel just for this piece. It was a big enough task for them to fill the initial Row 1 hospitals where soldiers are initially treated. So manpower and having people ready to go is a huge issue for this country, because is not as big a country as Russia. You cannot mobilize a force truly to compete with that and those numbers, but they are doing what they can. And so far, because that we have provided this critical service, that it has become a constant. And so I hope that, yes, I mean, it would be my hope that they could take this service over, or to learn from this what we're doing, sort of the critical pieces, so that eventually it would become a state institution. And it should, because during war, this service is absolutely needed, and so it will be a future need should the country continue.
Okay, last two questions. Last one about MOAS, and then one on a more personal level. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now with the new U.S. administration. Support for Ukraine very much in doubt. Sometimes in some reports you can read that a peace agreement is expected this week, and in some others next year or in 6 months. It's like very, very uncertain, the situation. But what would you say are your expectations, or maybe your hopes? And does an end to the war mean an end to this mission?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's nothing that we want more is to see the end of killing. When you are doing this job, you see the effects of war directly. And, these experiences that I've had and others that have visited our operations, we see the lives that are affected directly in front of us. And so for us, there's no politics in what we do. We just want it to be over in the best way possible. Of course, that we feel very close to Ukraine, because we have seen their suffering, we have seen their courage under this enormous pressure from a very big, large power. And it's very admirable, and it's something that I think the rest of the world can learn from, and should see that this country, this little country, has standing up to a big boy, and have managed to remain independent and sovereign. And so for that, this is something that we want for Ukraine as well. And so, but from just the traditional humanitarian perspective, we want the killing to be over. And so whatever path gets us there, we support. But unfortunately, being a part of, being in Ukraine for so long and understanding the political dynamics here and in Europe and in the United States, we are preparing for an end to the battle and a ceasefire. We are preparing to continue, because this is what our job is to do. And so for as long as there is a war, we will try our best to be here.
Okay, and last question. Obviously, you've been living in Kyiv for over 3 years now, I'm assuming.
How about you? A little bit, a mixture. I've actually lived quite a few places in the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in Ukraine,
yes.
Right? So from the cities under attack perspective, obviously it's a very different situation here than being out in the east. But what kind of experiences do you have as a resident of like air attacks on cities?
Right. Well, I think at the very beginning of the war, and I was here on the first day of full-scale invasion, it's an extremely scary thing, because to be honest, and I've been in war zones and worked in war zones for all my life, but something such as that was a very unique and scary experience at the beginning. And just because it was uncertainty, it was not clarity what was happening, where it was safe to be, where it wasn't safe to be. So as the war has progressed, there has become this societal acceptance of the situation in many ways. And so, yes, you may be on the front line, and then 20 minutes down the road, you're having a hot dog at a gas station and having a coffee, and everything is normal, and life goes on, because life must go on. Cannot live in a constant state of fear. People naturally, their psychology adapts and they accept. It's not so nice that they've had to accept these terrible realities that every night when you go to bed, you're woken up by the sound of an explosion or the sound of a drone flying over you. And it doesn't matter what city that you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in the front line, if you're in Kyiv, or if you're in Lviv or Odessa. It's happening to everybody. And so every night when you go to bed and you listen, and the sound of a drone flying over you with a large missile attached to it, and it could be yours. It could be coming right directly and you don't know it. And so this acceptance of your fate, that every night you go to sleep, you might not wake up in the morning, is something that I think has had a huge effect on the psychological mind of Ukrainians, because it's not normal to live under a state of constant fear for your life, for your family's life, for your children's life. So these things are very difficult for people to I guess accept that this is the way of life. Nobody wants this to continue. So for me, having experienced this like a Ukrainian too, I also feel this. And I feel the same things every night I go to sleep, that I must accept my fate. And but I guess I come from a background of helping people in not just my humanitarian career, but professional career, helping people in crisis situations. And you could never really predict when you will be in trouble. You could have more accident in Malta. Versus if you come to Ukraine, so there are dangers in every way of life. But here, this one is a very particular animal in its own. And for us, again, that psychological issue that the Ukrainians are enduring, we also want that to stop, because it's too much. It's too much for anybody.